Mark Blyth, Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea. Embark on a thought-provoking journey as we dissect the history and repercussions of austerity in Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea by Mark Blyth. Throughout the summary, you'll encounter compelling historical accounts revealing the failures of austerity in restoring economic growth. We'll delve into the causes of the 2007 to 2008 global financial crisis and debunk the widely held belief that government overspending was to blame. Furthermore, we'll explore how poorly equipped European nations were to handle the crisis, and how detrimental bailouts and austerity have been for countries like Ireland, while shedding light on alternative solutions successfully implemented in Iceland.
Austerity, a failed economic remedy. Clamping down on national budgets might seem like a sensible response during economic hardship, but history tells us otherwise. Austerity often does more harm than good. Revisiting the 1920s and 1930s, we see that implementing austerity measures in the United States during the Great Depression only served to amplify the crisis. Likewise, countries like Germany, Sweden, France, and Japan faced economic stagnation during the same period, all of which turned around only after they abandoned austerity and ramped up investments. There are, of course, apparent success stories credited to austerity, such as Australia, Denmark, and Ireland, but these examples don't necessarily stand up to closer scrutiny. In Denmark and Ireland, budget cuts coincided with periods of economic growth, rather than recession, rendering the austerity measures less impactful. Moreover, no clear evidence supports the notion that Australia's perceived success came through reductions in unemployment benefits or capital taxes. The takeaway, instead of pinning our hopes on austerity as a means to spur economic recovery, we should be cautious of its potential dangers and explore other alternatives to boost growth. Unmasking the financial crisis origins. The 2007 to 2008 global financial crisis was predominantly caused by banking practices rather than government overspending. Repo markets played a significant role, as banks heavily engaged in short-term loans using housing mortgage securities. When homeowners began defaulting on their mortgages, the securities lost value and banks started losing money. Public panic quickly escalated, leading to massive withdrawals, triggering a borrowing frenzy among banks. Central to this crisis were collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and credit default swaps, CDSs, risky investment practices. Insurance companies like AIG sold numerous CDSs, but when mortgage defaults rose, they couldn't cover the payouts. As the crisis grew, investor desperation spread to Europe, expanding the financial collapse's reach. While many laid the blame for the 2007 to 2008 global financial crisis at the feet of government overspending, it was actually the U.S. banking system whose flawed practices caused the crash. A significant contributor was the widespread use of repo markets, where banks borrowed and loaned short-term funds based on housing mortgage securities. Initially successful, the strategy faltered when mortgage defaults increased dramatically, rendering the securities worthless and causing banks to lose vast sums. Panicked by media coverage, people rushed to withdraw their money, exacerbating the crisis by forcing banks to borrow even more from each other. At the heart of these intertwined issues were collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and credit default swaps, CDSs. CDOs bundled random mortgage securities together, enabling investors to bet against the bank using CDSs. If homeowners defaulted, the investors would receive hefty payouts. Insurance companies, such as AIG, sold vast quantities of CDSs to banks worldwide, believing the mortgage market to be safe. However, as mortgage defaults soared, they found themselves unable to cover the ballooning payouts. Desperate to offload their now toxic CDOs, investors slashed prices, but with no U.S. buyers, they turned to Europe, inadvertently spreading the financial crisis even further. The PIIGS Perpetual Austerity. Back in 2008, the European financial crisis hit Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain hard, collectively known as the PIIGS nations due to their weak economic policies. The aging population in Portugal and Italy, along with the property bubble in Ireland and Spain, had hindered their economic growth. The euro's adoption increased their troubles, as they were no longer able to use traditional crisis management tools like manipulating currency values and export rates. In response to the crisis, these countries decided to bail out their banks, which seemed too big to fail. However, in doing so, they doomed themselves to never-ending austerity measures and a lack of funds for future investments. Debunking Irish austerity success. Contrary to popular belief, Ireland's recovery through austerity policies has not achieved the desired economic health. Post-bailout, the country experienced nearly non-existent growth while unemployment and debt-to-GDP ratio rose significantly. Comparatively, Iceland chose a different path by supporting social benefit programs and implementing tax reforms, leading to a faster recovery. Ireland has often been admired as a successful example of economic recovery through austerity measures, with many suggesting Greece should follow suit. However, taking a closer look at the results of those measures indicates that Ireland's economy has not truly recovered. Following a €70 billion bank bailout, Ireland pursued an austerity program, including public sector salary cuts averaging 20% and drastic reductions to welfare and other social benefits. Despite these efforts, the country's economic growth was barely noticeable at 1% in 2011. Additionally, most of this minimal growth was attributed to foreign companies leveraging reduced taxes without contributing to the long-term prosperity of the nation. In comparison to its 2007 figures, by mid-2012, Ireland's unemployment rate rose to nearly 15% from 4.5%. Furthermore, the debt-to-GDP ratio increased from 32% in 2007 to a concerning 108% in 2013. To understand alternative outcomes, one must consider Iceland's approach. In 2007, it was in a more precarious position than Ireland. Iceland's banks had an assets-to-GDP ratio of nearly 1,000%. However, Iceland chose a different path, allowing the banks to experience a financial failure. Instead of following Ireland's example, Iceland increased support for social benefit programs, raised taxes on top earners, lowered taxes for low to middle income families, and devalued its currency. These moves contradicted the International Monetary Fund's dire predictions and bolstered Iceland's GDP growth. While bank bailouts and austerity measures may benefit the banks by preventing bankruptcy, these approaches are not always in the best interest of a nation or its citizens. Observing the contrasting outcomes in Ireland and Iceland reveals that alternatives to austerity policies can lead to a more rapid and sustainable economic recovery. Rethinking recovery, austerity versus alternatives. Instead of relying on austerity measures to recover from financial crises, countries should consider alternative approaches, such as allowing troubled banks to go bust, founding new banks, and raising taxes on the wealthy. This approach was successfully applied in Iceland, where 20% of the country's GDP was allocated to the establishment of new banks instead of bailing out existing ones. Furthermore, studies have suggested that one-time taxes on the wealthiest individuals could significantly boost a nation's GDP revenue. Such creative solutions prioritize the majority's interests, potentially paving the path for a more stable and prosperous future. Looking at Ireland's path to recovery through austerity might not reveal the full story. A better example to learn from could be Iceland, which took an unconventional approach by letting their struggling banks go bust during a financial crisis. This decision loosened the bank's control over the economy and prevented the draining of valuable resources from the state that would have otherwise been consumed by bailouts. Instead, Iceland channeled a significant portion, 20%, of their GDP to create new banks to handle domestic operations. This move was relatively costlier upfront but saved money in the long run when compared to expensive bailouts. It's crucial for countries to question the necessity of propping up their ailing banks, considering the banking industry isn't an essential service like food or energy production. Banks primarily exist to facilitate transactions between borrowers and lenders while amassing substantial profits. Letting banks fail is only part of a successful recovery strategy. Another key aspect is raising taxes on the wealthy to reduce the debt more rapidly. For instance, a 2012 study by German economists revealed that a one-time tax on the wealthiest 8% of citizens could result in a 9% increase in GDP revenue, while American economists Peter Diamond and Emmanuel Saez suggested that raising income tax on the richest could also significantly boost GDP revenue. By exploring such creative solutions that prioritize the majority, nations could weather future financial crises with greater resilience. The key lies in learning from past mistakes and choosing alternative paths that promise more equitable outcomes.
As we conclude the summary of Austerity, the history of a dangerous idea, it is evident that austerity has consistently led to economic stagnation or turmoil. Learning from Iceland's experience, the key to recovery seems to lie in letting banks go bust and loosening their grip on the economy. It is crucial for nations to reevaluate the services that banks provide and consider other potential solutions, such as raising taxes on the wealthy, in order to reduce debt and achieve economic resilience. As another financial crisis looms ahead, one can only hope that the valuable lessons from this book will inspire more effective and visionary choices in the future.